Will Los Angeles Rams defensive tackle Aaron Donald finish his career with the Los Angeles Rams? I sure hope so, but we're going to find out on this episode of the Locked On Rams podcast.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rams Nation, what is going on? As always, it is your boy, your host, Sosa Kremenjas. I'm a fantasy analyst at PFF and your host here at the Locked On Rams podcast, your number one daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Rams and part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Before we dive into this mailbag episode, I wanted to tell you guys that this episode is brought to you by McDonald's. Proudly serving communities since 1965, McDonald's is an unofficial community center. It's more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. A big thank you to our friends over at McDonald's for always being there. I'm loving it. And now we can dive into this mailbag episode. As I mentioned, you guys shot over a bunch of good questions like you always do. And for those that are watching on YouTube, I told you I'd surprise you with a jersey. And I got that Kawhi Leonard custom-made throwback. As you can see, the NBA Finals badge. The Raptors, the last time they were in the championship, 2018, and they actually won, which is pretty crazy to think. I'm located in Canada, for those that don't know, which is why I'm a Raptors fan, right near Toronto. So shout out to the Raptors. Hopefully we have a good NBA season, but also shout out to you guys for always listening and making us your first daily listen and for sending in these questions. So we may as well just dive into them. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of trade deadline talk, certain questions about the current roster. Do certain players make sense for the Rams to go get during this trade deadline? Even a Cam Akers question. So we'll dive into everything here. And starting at the top, my man Dennis at DBrez6, he said, take money and what the Rams would have given up completely out of the equation. Which player who is a legit trade candidate in the next week would you love to see on the Rams? And this one's tough because part of me wants to say Chandler Jones, who obviously plays for the Arizona Cardinals, but the Cardinals would never trade him within the division, especially not to a Rams team who is trying to compete for a Super Bowl. The Cardinals are clearly trying to win the NFC West right now. They are technically the best team in the NFL at 7-0. And so I can't even foresee them wanting to get rid of Jones anymore. The reason I brought him up was because there was a lot of talk in the offseason that he wanted to get moved. He actually requested a trade. They obviously did not trade him. He's still on the roster. And now they lose J.J. Watt for the entire season. So it doesn't really make sense for them to want to banish that kind of player. That's the guy that I think would be a dream type scenario. In terms of realistic other candidates, I don't think that there's really anybody out there that I'm kind of salivating over. Maybe the one guy that I would love to see still, Melvin Ingram, the pass rusher from the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you guys listened to this podcast for a few months, you heard me talk about him many times during free agency. This was a guy that I really wanted the Rams to go get, but I just don't think they need much right now, at least not in terms of what's going to be out there. So that would be, I guess, my little wish list, but there's really not much because I think the Rams are pretty set in terms of where they are. The next one is from at LA Ramsey 46. He said, how significant do you think a healthy Cam Akers would impact the offense in the playoffs if he gets the green light? Do you think it will affect the chemistry at all? And the reason he brought this up was because the other day, Sean McVay was asked a question, I think it was by JB Long, and he said basically, we've been seeing Cam Akers training. He posts some of these videos on Instagram of him running, and he looks like he's basically ready to go. Obviously, he's not, but he looks 100% recovered, and that's obviously not the case again, but Sean McVay was asked, can this guy maybe make a return late into the season, late in the playoffs, somewhere around that area? And Sean McVay said he wouldn't rule it out. And of course, it's going to be very, very hard to come back. I mean, I think January would be about 6 months since he tore his Achilles, which is a really, really hard injury to come back from, especially for running backs in general. Never mind the time frame. There is not a lot of successful returns in general. Like guys that have torn their Achilles have never really come back the same from that running back position. So I'm not saying that's going to happen with Cam Akers. I really don't know what's going to happen. But in terms of if he comes back, I guess there's a possibility. There definitely is, right? We've seen guys like Terrell Suggs who tore his Achilles, and he came back in 5.5 months for the Baltimore Ravens, I think it was, way back when they were going to the Super Bowl run, I think. Again, not a very similar position. Pass rusher, you don't have to plant and cut a ton like a running back does. So I don't know that it's necessarily realistic or the smart thing to do, because if he doesn't play in the playoffs, he gets all of the next offseason as well to come back next year, which would give him 12 to 13 months recovery time as opposed to 6. seems like the much smarter way to go, the route to go with a young player that you want to be a focal piece for your offense. If he comes back, I think he can positively impact the team, but he's probably going to be rusty at that point. The Rams are going to be deep in the playoffs, and I don't know how comfortable you feel about giving that guy either a big workload or taking plays out of Darrell Henderson's hands, because presumably this guy's been really good. So I'm not really holding my breath here. It would be cool to see. I hope he can come back, but I just don't know that it's a smart move in terms of a guy that young that you want to be around for your offense for the next 3, 4, 5+ years. Probably not the smartest move. The next one is from @disinformed Dan. He said, what does the Kenny Young trade say about the Rams defensive schemes and their faith in other players on the roster? It's a good question. Now, I don't necessarily think it's going to change much in terms of the scheme. This team has basically done the same thing somewhat from last year in terms of how they want to go about their defensive play, and the rest has really been the same throughout this entire season. They like to line up a lot of 5 guys on the line of scrimmage, which means there's only 1 guy on the second level of the defense, technically 1 linebacker. They do a lot of that, and that would mean that there's only 1 linebacker out on the field. Now, that's where things get interesting, because is that going to be Troy Reeder, which it has been the last few weeks, or is that going to be Ernest Jones moving forward? Because presumably this is now the next guy who's going to step up as a starting linebacker. And Raheem Morris, defensive coordinator, even singled him out and said, we believe in this guy. We trust him. It's his time to start. We know that number 50, third-round rookie Ernest Jones is now going to be the guy. There's no doubt about it. Sure, they could still trade for someone, which I guess would shake things up. But as of right now, they're going to go into this weekend with Ernest Jones getting a lot of playing time. And it's going to be good to see how he's translated, how he's developed throughout this last 2 or 3 months. I don't really know what to expect. I don't think the defense is really going to change much at all. The one thing I'm just curious is, how is Jones going to fit into this defense? How is he going to pair with Troy Reeder? Is he going to be a little bit better in coverage? Who's going to be that one linebacker that gets 75, 85, 95% of the snaps? Because one of those guys is going to be on the field exclusively, and I just don't know which it is. So that's going to be fun to find out. I would presume that maybe it might be Troy Reeder for the next week or 2 while Ernest Jones sort of gets caught up and gets his feet under him. But in 2, 3, 5 weeks, I foresee that being Ernest Jones for sure. This guy is basically the future at the linebacker position, at least for now, until you get someone else. And if that's the case, just makes a lot more sense for him to be that guy, especially going into next season where you might want him to start calling plays and things like that. So in just a second, we'll dive into some of these remaining questions. We got Matthew Stafford questions, more trade deadline talk, of course, and a lot more, as well as Aaron Donald talk. Is he going to remain with the Rams for the rest of his career? I know we all got our fingers crossed for that one. You guys can always follow us on Twitter @QBsMEP, @LockedOnRams, and on YouTube @LockedOnRams. And I already mentioned McDonald's on this podcast. You guys go check them out. Everyone that's listening to this podcast has went to McDonald's at some point in their life. We all have memories there as children, celebrating birthday parties, whatever the case may be. McDonald's, it's more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's a place where friends and family can come to reconnect, a place where classmates can meet up for a study group, knowing they're going to have dependable Wi-Fi and endless supplies of French fries and Smarties, McFlurries, and just McFlurries in general. You guys have heard me talk about Smarties. I don't need to explain it anymore. They're a chocolate-coated candy. They're not some weird powdered candy, all right? Smarties, McFlurries. You guys got to try it out in Canada if you're ever there. Win or lose, it's a place where teammates, competitors, the home team, the away team can come to recharge. It's the place that we all look forward to when you got a long road trip, you want to rest your legs, grab a nice little snack, head over to McDonald's. You guys have heard me talk about it as well. The best hangover cure, the best late night intoxication food. They probably don't want to market themselves like that, but I'm telling you, man, if you've been through that same scenario, I know you've had McDonald's, and I know you've enjoyed it a lot in those scenarios. So head to your local McDonald's, refuel, reconnect. Did somebody say Locked On Rams watch party? That'd be something now, wouldn't it? I'm loving it. Thank you so much for McDonald's for always sponsoring us here. Thank you guys for always making us your first daily listen here at the Locked On Rams podcast. You know we've got you covered for all things Los Angeles Rams, but with the trade deadline right around the corner, don't miss our live NFL trade deadline show, reaction to every move, plus a second half NFL season preview and much more. Catch the live show from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern, November 2nd on the Locked On NFL YouTube page. Now we're going to pick right back up where we left off. You guys peppered me with some good ones here, so we'll dive right back in. The next one from @Anthony_Mars. He said, hypothetically speaking, if the Rams made a trade with Atlanta, which player would you think makes the most sense for the Rams here? Hayden Hurst, tight end, or Dion Jones, linebacker? This one's easy for me. I mean, anyone that says Hayden Hurst should be slapped. I'm sorry. Hayden Hurst does not move the needle at all for the Rams here. I guess it makes a little bit sense because they did lose their backup tight end, Johnny Mundt, I'm speaking about, the torn ACL. And Hayden Hurst is known to be a guy that can put his hand in the dirt and play that traditional tight end style role, so he can block a little bit here and there. But man, Dion Jones is one of the better linebackers in football. He is a dynamic coverage guy. This guy has sideline to sideline speed. He is literally what teams look for in linebackers today. Guys that can move, guys that can play in space, guys that can excel in coverage. And if we're not talking about money here and compensation and all this other stuff, it's Dion Jones easily for me. And, that guy would be a huge difference maker for the Rams. Don't think he's realistic. Hayden Hurst might be, but I don't think they're really going to be all too interested in that either. Now, there's a good question, but for me, it's Jones easily in that one. The next one's from @GBreal GTZ. He said, is there a chance that the Rams extend Stafford, Matthew Stafford, of course, before the trade deadline to clear up some space, cap space, and bring in some big names for their Super Bowl run? That is a really good question because it's a viable option. I mean, Matthew Stafford's deal is expiring here soon, and he's not paid much money. And one of the ways you can actually create cap space in the NFL is to restructure guys or extend guys. And you can sort of move money around in that scenario. And there's a million ways to go about it, but we know the Rams are one of the more active teams when it comes to moving money around, finding ways to create cap space. And that's why all these people log on Twitter so pissed off, always saying the cap's not real. What's going on here? That's how you do it. I mean, you get a guy like Tony Pastors in your front office to manipulate the numbers, and you sort of kick that can down the road. So do I think it's possible that they could do that? I do. I just don't think it's very realistic that it's going to happen over the next few days. I mean, Stafford is a guy that is obviously going to want a top of the market deal. We're talking $45 million per year probably. And the Rams, that's not the kind of move you make on a blink of an eye, in 2 or 3 days. So I think that's probably way better served for the offseason. And I think there's close to 100% chance it's going to happen. Maybe if not this offseason, in that first week or two in September, like we saw with Jared Goff a little while ago. You're going to want to extend Stafford. You didn't trade for this guy and move multiple first-round picks to get a year or two service out of him. He's obviously going to be here for the long term, but I just don't think it's really going to happen right now. I think there's way too much going on, and it's just such a hard thing to do in the middle of a season, but it's definitely a very good option. And I think if the Rams want to gear up for that Super Bowl run, we've already seen a couple of different moves. You look at the Rob Havenstein restructure, moving on from Kenny Young. I just think the Rams fans, and myself included, we always get excited around the trade deadline. We all want, some superstar addition, and the Rams may trade for someone, but I just don't think it's going to be someone expensive. It's just so hard to fit in your salary cap. Never mind for teams that have $20 million in cap space. The Rams have like 5. I mean, they're not going to go right up against the edge or right up against the wall there to bring someone in. It's just not that realistic. Could they bring someone in? Absolutely. I just don't think it's going to be one of those players that's going to require enough space to be open to extending a guy like Stafford or something like that. That's just going to require way more money than needed. So I don't think that's going to happen, but it's a really good idea for sure. The next one is from @Dr_Krishnan. He said, why is our secondary so badly susceptible to double moves from opposing wide receivers and running backs? It's surprising to see because we carried over 75% of our personnel over from 2020, yet they're caught wrong-footed and missing tackles. Is it a coaching thing, or somehow have they just lost the instinct? And that is a really good question. I mean, I wish I had the answer, because we're not in the locker room. We're not in practices. I can't really see what's going on behind closed doors. All we can see is what's happening on Sunday, and we get a nice little 3.5-hour glimpse or picture out of what's way more extensive than just that. So it's hard to say. I don't really know what they're being coached, how things are going there, what their philosophy is on defense. But theoretically speaking, this defense is carrying over a lot of what they did last year with Brandon Staley. And if that's the case, well, they prioritized stopping the big play, the passing plays from that defense. And they really were light in boxes, meaning they're not going to put a lot of guys near the line of scrimmage. They're going to purposely want teams to run on them just so they can't pass deep on them. And right now, like you mentioned, the Rams have not been that great in terms of stopping the deep pass. It's been a little bit better, I think, over the last few weeks. Of course, Seattle didn't really have that much success with it. Some of these other teams that they've recently played, not really done much. The Giants couldn't really do anything. The Lions didn't really push the ball deep. But before then, there was a couple of glitches there that we saw. Indianapolis, I think, had a little bit of success moving the ball downfield. Some of these other teams, obviously, Arizona was doing it at will. Don't really know why these guys are a little bit more susceptible this season. I think, it hurts to lose guys like John Johnson on the back end, who's your number one communicator, not just a elite safety. Like, this guy was a communicator and lined everyone up, and you lose another really good player in Troy Hill. it's hard to replace, 30, 35% of your secondary in one offseason where they didn't draft anyone really. They didn't really bring anyone in either. So I think that's kind of been the issue in terms of why these guys aren't performing a little bit better, because I think even the guys from last year that were better just aren't as good this year. It feels like Jordan Fuller's not really made any impact plays, which is also a little bit of a good thing. You don't hear his name called. It's an ideal scenario. You don't want your safety's name being called consistently, but it feels like those splash plays aren't really there. Taylor Rapp been a little bit up and down, inconsistent. Terrell Burgess not getting any run. Jalen Ramsey being used a little bit, I think, too much in weird scenarios like blitzing. You want this guy covering, and he's amazing, but, he's kind of wasted sometimes when he's blitzed. Darius Williams not out there. So I think it's a little bit of the personnel issue, a little bit of Raheem Morris playing single high, not playing as much two safety structures. Remember last year, they ran a lot of, cover 2, cover 4, which means there's always two safeties back there. Right now, they're running much more cover 3, cover 1 kind of thing, where you only have one safety in the middle of the field and he has to cover the whole field. So it's a lot harder to cover a whole field with one guy than it is with two guys who can cover half and half. So, there's a lot of different nuances here. I'm not really sure why they're not as good as they were, but I think it's a little bit of everything in terms of the personnel, the scheme, some of these injuries, some guys maybe just not playing as well. And it's sort of just brought this weird dynamic together now where they're just not as good as they were last year. And I don't think they were expected to be, at least not in my eyes. If you guys did expect them to be as good as they were last year, you're probably disappointed. But for me, I knew there was going to be some sort of step back here. They were just way too good last season. That defense wasn't just good. It wasn't just great. They were one of the best defenses probably of the last decade, maybe 15 years. Like, they were great. So that's not going to be easy to recreate. It's going to be a lot of regression. We talked about that over the course of the offseason, that they might be a top 10 defense still. They might be a top 12 defense still. And it doesn't matter, because as long as the offense is better, and we expected it to be a lot better, they were going to be able to offset what they dropped off in the defensive section. And they've done exactly that. So I feel like if your expectations were pretty aligned with mine, then we weren't really surprised with what we're seeing right now. We're not really disappointed. I feel like we knew this was coming, and it's sort of come to fruition too. So in just a second here, we're going to dive into some of these remaining questions. There's a Jeff Fisher question here. I mean, Jeff Fisher, I feel like we never spoke about Jeff Fisher again after he got fired. I was hoping to never hear his name again, but he's a legend. So we'll dive into that in just a second. You guys make sure to tune back in here at the Locked On Rams podcast next week. Of course, we're going to recap this game and dive into next week, going into the next game, and everything else you need to know about your Los Angeles Rams. Before we get there, I want to tell you about the best protein bar on the market. You guys have heard me talk about the Built Bar on this podcast, and they are the best on the market. Like I mentioned, I've tried a lot of different protein bars in my time. Some are chalky, some are gross, some don't have any good flavors, some are expensive, some don't even have any protein in them, and they're just marketed as protein bars. The Built Bar has absolutely none of these issues. I mean, they're low in calories. They're absolutely delicious. They have over 9 different flavors, so you can get a bunch of different packages that you prefer, mix and match the different flavors that you like. They're low in sugar. They have 19 grams of protein per bar. They're high in fiber, and they even work for you if you are on the keto diet. The best part, you'll even get a free cooler with your purchase while the supplies last. All you have to do, just go to BuiltBar.com and use a promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. That's LOCK15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. Thank you guys for always making us your first daily listen here at the Locked On Rams podcast. We appreciate you so much. We're getting close to 900 subscribers on YouTube. Let's run it up. Let's get to that 1K before the next few weeks, man. I think we can get there. You guys are absolutely killing it. For your second daily listen, make sure to go check out the Peacock and Williamson NFL podcast. These guys are going to break down every major NFL news story every single day in under 30 minutes, entirely free, wherever you get your podcasts. Now we can dive into these last few questions that you guys shot over to me. The next one is from @RanWithTheCame. He said, would you have ever guessed that Cooper Kupp was this type of an elite talent, just being held back by mediocre quarterback play in previous years? I'm not really sure it's even fair to say that. Like, we knew that Cooper Kupp was great. And yeah, of course, he never had these kind of numbers, but these numbers are insane. I mean, it's not easy to be projected to beat Calvin Johnson's single season receiving record. Like, that's a number that should stand for 15, 20 years. The only reason it might actually get passed by Cooper Kupp is because now we have 17 games, not 16. He wouldn't be on pace to beat it in just 16. So the numbers are insane. His performance is crazy, but I feel like there's not really anything different. The only difference right now, it feels like, instead of 3-yard passes into the flat, we're seeing 27-yard passes down the middle of the field. That's what's exciting about it to me. So I'm not really surprised that Kupp is this good. I think we all knew he was this good. The only difference is the offense is not boring as hell anymore. They're not throwing 3-yard passes anymore. They're pushing it downfield. Matthew Stafford is going to push it downfield. And with that comes more yardage, more opportunities to make big plays, more opportunities to score. They're obviously more productive on offense, so they're going to be in the red zone more often. They're going to have legitimately more touchdowns. So it's just kind of a good mix, I think, in terms of why the numbers look the way they do. But in terms of the talent, don't really think there's much different here. I mean, this guy's always been great. We all knew he was great, and it's sort of just remained that way this season. The next one is from @ElanCal. He said, with Jeff Fisher, the Rams were notorious for playing down to their competition. Do you see anything similar given the team's performance during the Lions game, or is it more of a one-off, sort of like that Jets game from last year? Also, what's up with the tackling technique or lack thereof? I'm not concerned about the Lions game. You know, this one was, I look at it from a human aspect, right? These guys were probably a little bit nervous. Maybe Stafford being a little bit nervous. He's never gone against his former team. You know, there's some sort of emotions in there, whether or not he's going to admit it in press conferences. You know, Jared Goff was pissed off to the tees. I mean, he's come out and said it in press conferences like, yeah, I was pissed. I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they traded me. I can't believe they went about it that way. So not really surprised. I mean, that one was a weird dynamic. And, you know, if there wasn't that opportunity for the Lions, I mean, you look at this game, this next one coming up here against the Texans, if they do the same thing, well, then I'll seriously be concerned. But unless that happens, you know, I just think it was a one-off type of thing, like you mentioned with the Jets game last year. In terms of the tackling, they need to be better. You mentioned it. It's been a lack of quality tackling. I mean, guys are bouncing off defenders. You look at Nick Scott last game, goes up to make a tackle. I think it was like on 3rd and long or 2nd and long. Doesn't even use his hands. He just hits him with his shoulder, drops to the floor, gets injured because he doesn't wrap up and tackle properly. And a 2nd and 17 turns into a 3rd and 2. Like, these things need to be cleaned up. You need to be better at tackling. We'll see what happens. You know, I don't know why that is the way it is, because they should be better at tackling. They have enough talent to do it. It's really just an effort thing. You know, at the end of the day, these guys have the talent to do it. So we'll see if it gets cleaned up. I think for the most part, they've been okay, but there's still some of those instances every now and again where you just get so frustrated because a broken tackle can be the difference between, you know, 3rd and 12 and 3rd and 3. And 3rd and 12 is hard to convert versus 3rd and 3. You have a lot better shot to do it. So against great teams, you're going to need to be able to make those difference plays there. So we'll see if it happens. You know, ultimately, I think they could do it, but it's really up to them. The next one is from @JB_Peoples. He said, do you think Aaron Donald will sign another extension and finish out his career with the Rams? He's the one player I couldn't bear to watch on another team. Man, I hope so. I'm perfectly aligned with you here. I have zero interest in ever seeing this guy take another snap for another team. Like, no, I don't want to see another helmet on Aaron Donald's head. I don't want to see number 99 playing somewhere else. I do not. I don't care how much it costs. I don't care, you know, how long you have to sign him for, what kind of money you have to pay. This guy belongs with the Rams. Not only that, he's the best player in franchise history. Let's just call it what it is. I mean, when it's all said and done, he is going to be the best player to ever play for this team. Like, I think that's going to be the case. So there's no reason to get rid of him. I mean, he's a dominant force like we've never really seen, or at least we don't see much of. Maybe once every 10 or 20 years, you might get a year or two where a guy might reach that peak, but to do it consistently for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, that doesn't happen. So I don't want to see him play anywhere else ever. I want to see number 99 retired for the Rams. I want to see him set records across the board for this team. I want to see him get to the Hall of Fame. And we know those things are all going to happen. Hopefully, though, we get to see him finish his career with the Rams. I mean, he doesn't seem like he wants to go anywhere else. The Rams shouldn't have any motivation or reason to let him go. So like you mentioned, fingers crossed on that one. I do not want to see him playing for anybody else, but it's really up to them at the end of the day. He's getting up there in age a little bit. I think he's like 30, 31 now, but there still seems to be a lot of time left in those legs, man. That guy is special. The next one's from @RockRocksPop. He said, Taylor Rapp to linebacker. It's a good question. We mentioned it. I think it was on 2 days ago or 3 days ago now, the podcast. I would like to see him more in that sort of a role where they kick him closer to the line of scrimmage and let him play some underneath zone coverage type of thing. So some of the same responsibilities as a linebacker, but he's never going to be moved to linebacker. I just don't see it. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's just way harder to do than fans might suggest. Like, this is two totally different positions. So if we're talking, third and long, second and long passing situations, let's move him closer to the line of scrimmage inside the box. I think there's a possibility that happens, and I hope it does. But if we're talking about, Mark Barron, go from safety to linebacker, don't play any more safety, Ray Armstrong type of thing, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it should happen either. It's hard to do that, and this guy's pretty decent at what he does, so don't think that one makes a lot of sense. This next one, the second to last one, from @show_sucks. He said, Zach Cunningham or Marcus Maye, do either of these guys make any sense for the Rams? And I don't really think so. I mean, Marcus Maye, too expensive. The Rams have a log jam at safety right now. Just doesn't really make any sense to me to go get another safety who's going to struggle to find the field with all these different guys. I don't like that one at all. He's also 29. He's on an expiring contract. Too expensive. I mean, the Rams would have to pay him $5+ million, if not even a little bit more for the rest of the season. I don't like that deal. Zach Cunningham, on the other hand, makes a little bit more sense because he's a linebacker, but his deal is terrible. I mean, he is going to be paid $14-15 million throughout the next 3 seasons. And unless the Rams want to trade for him now and then trade him again in the offseason, there is no way they're going to incur that type of cap hit moving forward. Not at linebacker. These guys do not value linebacker like that. They're not going to pay that kind of money. So Cunningham, I think, makes sense from a personnel standpoint, but the money doesn't work. And Marcus Maye, I just don't think makes much sense at all. So I'm going to pass on both those guys. I just don't think the Rams have any interest in either player. The last one here, it's a nice joke one from my guy @BrianTeds. He said, would you rather have a date with Ashanti or the Rams winning a Super Bowl this year? Ashanti, if you're listening to this, close your ears. You're the GOAT. You're the best. I had many dreams about you when I was 11 years old, 6 years old, 9 years old, but I got to go with the Rams. I mean, let's call it what it is. A date, that's only a couple hours. A Super Bowl, that's a lifetime. So we got to go with the Rams here. Ultimately, Ashanti, still the GOAT. I mean, she's the best. There's no doubt about that. Super talented, best R&B artist. But we got to go with the Rams. I think at the end of the day, they've got a legit shot to do it right now. We talk about it a lot on this podcast. They're a good team, and they're special. I think this unit has the ability to get there. And as long as they continue to progress and knock out some of these issues, these glitches on offense, and get this defense right a little bit, they can still grow. I think they're still growing into this team. You have a new D coordinator who's been with the team for, a few months. He's coached 7 games with this team. I mean, you have a new quarterback who's played 7 games with his guys. Like, they have a lot more to grow. And I don't know if they're going to get there or how long it might take them to get there. They may not even get there this year. It might be next year, but I certainly think this team is going to grow. They're going to get better. This is not their best football. I think they have a legit shot to win a Super Bowl. That should be enough for every Rams fan to get excited about the rest of the season. And if you guys are, make sure to keep tuning back in here at the Locked On Rams podcast. We're going to keep you guys covered every single day as your first daily listen on all things Los Angeles Rams. Just a reminder, you guys can always come connect with us on Twitter @QBsMEP, @LockedOnRams, and on YouTube @LockedOnRams. Please subscribe or follow to get our latest episodes, content, breaking news, and a whole lot more.